West Michigan. This is GRTV Media Business TV. My name is Pamela Keim, your host. The spirit of the show is to introduce West Michigan to all the businesses, nonprofits, individuals that can help us thrive in our lives. And we have a very special guest that we are zooming in from the Philadelphia area. I connected to her over the last month or so and learned about her coaching, and I think this would be perfect for Mental Health Month of May, because I will share with you, she is her name is Professor Theresa Marie, and she will explain why we don't say her last name. Cute. She comes from Glen Mills Coaching and Consulting, and she's a certified and licensed mental health and wellness coach. She's a speaker, a teacher, a certified licensed psychologist, trauma specialist. I'm dying to talk about that one. And then a stress management facilitator. So I want to welcome to GRTV Media Business TV, Theresa Marie, and she is going to share her grid system to help us all thrive in 2021. Hello, Theresa.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hello from outside of Philadelphia, where it's cold. It's cold here.
It is cold here too. We did get it. All right. So let's talk about, tell us who you are and how do, I see on your backdrop here, create your own story. I'm sure that's part of the program that you have. So if I were to meet you at an event or sit across from you at a dinner table, I want you to give us in a nutshell, who is Theresa Marie?
So Theresa Marie, my last name is Augustinelli. And so during COVID, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I had to learn the world of Zoom and StreamYard and virtual everything. And I gratefully began to work with different countries and people all over the world. And because of the long last name, difficult to talk about, over the past year or two, I became known globally as Theresa Marie. So I kind of went with that, and I like it. And many people have asked me, you know, what's your last name? Why don't you use your last name? Simply because, like Cher, Madonna, Ellen, I thought Theresa Marie, I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to go with Theresa Marie.
Well, I did listen to a lot of the videos that you have posted out and the podcasts that you have, and every time I was waiting for your co-host to say your last name, and she just referred to you to Theresa Marie. So I said, I'm gonna introduce you that way.
Thank you. So yeah, so who am I? I am somebody that simply just grew up outside of Philadelphia. My roots are South Philadelphia, Italians, loud, large families. My one grandmother lived 2 blocks away from the Italian market in South Philadelphia, 9th Street. I grew up there. My grandmother worked there for years. A lot of my family members had tables there and owned some stores there. My other grandmother actually lived 2 blocks from where the Mummers Parade used to be held. I have a long line of family members that actually mummer strutted. And so my roots are very, very South Philadelphia, traditional Italian, large family. Growing up, I was the youngest of 4, and I was very shy. I was petrified of strange people. I didn't talk a lot. I didn't like to talk. I was very insecure growing up. I was deathly afraid of groups. So it's hilarious now that I'm a speaker and a coach and a teacher. And you know, I got bullied on the schoolyard when I was in grade school because I was darker than most, because I'm very Italian. I developed earlier than a lot of the girls in my grades.
That puts you out of the group fast. If anybody that went through early puberty in my classroom were ousted for at least a year until everybody else caught up.
Right. So, you know, my parents would tell me how beautiful I was and that there was no competition out in that world. And I never believed it. And that's part of why we have the grid system that I'll talk about later. So what I learned to do is go inward. And I became that young girl that brought home all the stray animals, all of the stray people. I delved into music, writing, poetry, reading. So I went inward. I was very compliant. I didn't get in trouble. and I didn't cause any trouble. So going into my later years, I married young because here's the thing, where I grew up and how I grew up, the goal in life was to get married, have children, raise a family, and take care of your home. Many of us can relate to that. I did that. I got married young and I became a widow after 7 years of marriage. Suddenly, my husband died. I was left with a young child. He was 6 at the time. And I found that I had little skills, I had little resources, and I was living in a very remote part of Pennsylvania. And I completely just fell apart. I could not go on. So I decided to move back to my roots. And that's when I started to find a passion for helping people. I had to plan my husband's funeral and I spoke at it, which to me was absolutely terrifying to speak in front of people. But I felt like I connected. And so that was the beginning of the part of the journey that caused me to become who I am today.
Well, okay, so that's a lot of people, or you probably are dealing with. Let's talk about a little bit before we go into the grid system. It's COVID, and I think that's put many of us in a tailspin that we've never experienced before. We're all on communicating through Zoom. We're finding out over a whole year of being on this lockdown how much we need people. And can you share a little bit when you say that you stood out at people realizing they have to do something different than they did prior to, because the world is never going to be the same after 2021. And can you tell us a little bit, Theresa, is that one of the reasons why you started to create your grid system, is that people are realizing no matter what, we could be unlocked completely and the world will never be the same. And that's what I'm dealing with out there today.
So back when I opened my private practice almost 15 years ago, what I found was that I was teaching resilience before the word resilience was popular during the pandemic, because I had to learn resilience. I was on my journey and in my challenges, setbacks, which we'll talk about. I know we're going to talk a little bit about trauma. I found that I developed resilience through what I was going through, and that's what I was teaching people way back, in the early 2000s when I was counseling and coaching people and providing therapy. So resilience to me was part of my life, and it was part of my curriculum in helping others. Then with COVID, people had to start what we call pivoting. And I had to pivot. I had to learn to create a new story, because no longer were things going to be the same. My way of coaching, counseling, teaching, everything changed. And suddenly we've all found ourselves trying to navigate and stay connected in a very disconnected world. And so the grid system has been in the pipeline for me for probably 10 to 15 years. But I would have to say that during COVID and when I pivoted, I had a lot of time to write and a lot of time to research, and I had a lot of time to put together my grid system. And that's how it came to be. And so I created my own story through what I went through, tacking on COVID and the changes, navigating that, coupled with my resiliency skills and ability to bounce back, to bounce out, to bounce through. Now I find myself teaching more and more about how to navigate, learn resilience, and get through this pandemic.
Well, let's talk about one thing before we move on. Is you said you're an Italian family, and you had that. Did you have as we visualize Italian family that's close knit? Because I think a lot of people don't live close to their families anymore. They're not as close. Did you have that as a resource that your family?
So I had a very tight family. We were all very tight. Italians are tight. We have our own way of handling life and things. And so although my family was tight, and we'll talk about that also. There was a lot of tragedy in my family. People used to joke that we were like the Kennedys because it just seemed there was one tragedy after another in our family. And so while we were tight, our family got smaller and smaller over time. And I would say that for me, if it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't be where I am today. If it wasn't for my parents who are still alive, um, I I don't know if I would still be here to share with you my journey, my story, um, and that's the truth.
I
So
mean, because you mentally weren't prepared for what you were enduring, you know, the tragedy of losing your husband. Are we ever, how prepared can one person be? But I understand what you're saying. I think a lot of people are dealing with that right now with COVID.
yeah,
They were not prepared for what happened, and maybe they were outdoor people that really had their career out in the world. They
yep,
traveled. All of that, people aren't being sent anymore. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure it'll come back, but I don't know if it'll come back the way it did.
maybe not.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, okay. So you had tragedies. You had to go through that. Now let's talk about you just started your. So these, what's the? Tell us a little bit. Tell us what the grid system is for those who have never even been tried.
So so the grid system is it's I like to call it a psychological grid that we fill in over time, because during my journey and my challenge, I found that we have a framework of who we are based on what we've learned early on from those who are our significant caregivers or influencers, parents, um, the schoolyard bullies, the teachers, the good teachers, the bad teachers, the people that we meet over time. So I developed the grid system based on the fact that it's a two-part system. It's an acronym. Grid is actually an acronym, and I'll get into that in a moment. But it's an auditing system that helps you to identify and assess the negative behaviors that are keeping you stuck. Because what I had found as I was helping people, I realized that based on the person's psychological grid and what they were filling in over time, there were those who were getting through the tragedy, the trial, the setbacks, and there were those who were not getting past a certain level in their career, their health, their finances, their relationships. And I found that there were four common behaviors that seemed to be the common denominator that kept people stuck. So the grid system was born out of that, those four common patterns of negative self-sabotaging behaviors.
Well, what? Give us some example. Describe to us some of those. like,
So here's one of them: consistently believing that everything is going to turn out wrong. Why try? That is definitely self-sabotaging behavior. We call that catastrophic thinking. Psychologically, in mental health, it's catastrophic thinking. Nothing's going to work. I'm not going to try this. Everything I do is terrible, goes bad. So that's one of them.
Well, what is the difference between that? Can I interrupt? And
Yeah, sure.
and that it didn't turn out. It's better, but you're not seeing that it's better. That we have a vision in our head how this is supposed to play out, right? And you probably deal with that. If you ask anybody I always ask people, well, what's a good relationship look like to you? Because it's really interesting how people get fixated on certain things. All right, so we have a vision of what we want to happen, and then something else happened, and yet we can't see the forest, that it's better than it's exactly what we were asking for, but that's not what we got. Does that make sense? And the question?
That's a great point, because when you start looking at things in your life differently, things in your life will start looking different. And when you focus on the negative, you're going to keep getting negative. That's that attraction thing. I believe that, we are all sending out vibes, so to speak, and you kind of get what you put out there. So when you have a negative life full of tragedy, trauma, when you have a certain pattern of thinking you've downloaded over the years, you're expecting the worst because that's what you always got. And that's very common in people. The difference is this: you can bounce out of it, bounce through it. You can learn resilience, and you can be grateful for what you've been through, use it as a learning experience, use it to help you become bigger, better, faster, stronger, more productive. Or you can let it just throw you right into a tailspin and you quit and give up. Those are your two choices.
Can you tell when somebody's given up?
Unfortunately, I would say someone has given up when they take their life, or when they just become someone who is a homebody, introverted. They go off the grid, and you don't see them or hear from them anymore.
And, okay, that's very. So you were experiencing it now. How did you handle? You had trauma, but there's a lot of people out there, and I will be one of them, that grew up. I mean, I didn't have abuse or whatever, but you come from families. There's things where we play a role in our families. Does that make sense? And maybe our families weren't expecting us to be where I am today. They would never have believed that I could do that. Do you know what I'm saying? And then we live this what do you call it? Disguise that in front of our families to fit in. And we go out in the world and we're trying to make that work, but yet we're bringing all that baggage into our lives, into our career, into our decision making.
So that's actually the next part of the auditing process of the 4 common behaviors is loss. Now, a year and a half after my husband died, my brother was killed in a car accident. That was another thing. I was not ready for that. Other significant losses. My second oldest brother took his own life quite a few years later. I've lost family members. And I'll talk about another significant trauma in a few minutes, which led me to want to become a psychologist and a therapist. So what I find is people with significant losses, compounded losses, one thing after another, that can lend itself to not being able to bounce out of it. And the loss, focusing on the loss, was another common denominator. And I tell people all the time, you got to feel it to heal it. People stuff their feelings down, and we can never get past a certain level, in trying to help. So that was another thing. So everybody has stuff in their life. I believe that everybody does go through a season or a part of life where they're suffering or something goes wrong. I think with the pandemic, every human being on the planet is experiencing themselves right now with loss.
What about frustration? Let's talk about that before we move on to the next question. I think I deal with that frustration. I was dealing with something a couple days ago, and I just told my husband, and I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to just express my frustration, and then I got angry with myself. I'm like, I know I'm bringing more on myself, and I shouldn't say I am. All of these things started because all of us have heard what not to do, that we're bringing it on ourselves, that you're causing your own problems. How do you deal with people who are like, you know what, I'm having a bad day, Theresa. I'm frustrated. Can I not talk this out, or am I punishing, or I'm sabotaging myself for the future for talking about it? Does that make sense?
Well,
I was really stuck, right?
Yeah. So when you find yourself in a situation like that, we all get frustrated. That's a human behavioral emotion. It's normal. Frustrating. We're living in frustrating times. Right. I deal with people every day who get frustrated. I get frustrated. The minute we wake up and we start thinking about everything we went through the day before, we're already frustrated. And what we go through to get ready to get out of the house, for those of us who are able to get out and go to work, but you haven't even left the house yet and you're already frustrated. It's okay to get frustrated. And when I deal with people in the mental health sector, I'm very happy when people are angry, because depression is anger turned inside out. And when you don't deal with your anger and you stuff it in, you will become depressed and anxiety will take over. So I help people to embrace anger. It's okay to be angry. We should be angry. We're living in times that cause us to be angry. We're seeing things on the TV, on the news, on social media. We can be angry. It's what you do with it that counts. So I tell people all the time, if you're having a bad day and you don't want to get out of bed, it's okay. We don't care. Rest. You need rest. If I have people who tell me I didn't get my to-do list done, I can't stand myself. It's okay. We don't care. You don't have to get everything done on your list. Just know that when you put your head on your pillow each night, if you did your best for the day, then you did your best.
Yeah. Do most people hate themselves when you deal with them because they have they feel like there's an expectation of the opportunities by living in America that we should be more successful than we are because of our opportunities, and we really haven't found our true purpose to really take the hill. I'm going to fight to get this. It's not there in our emotion. Am I explaining that right? Is that people don't have a purpose and they haven't found it, and they expect this purpose to look different. Like you said, you can be still frustrated, yet you still have to take action, and that frustration may still be there. It's not going to go away. It may take weeks and months. And then the second question is, are people angry with God? Like you said, you went through a lot of tragedy, right? Can we talk to God? Like, I guess I read the Bible. I mean, I can see where Job was upset with God, and Cain upset with God. Do you understand what I'm saying? You get the religious aspect where you shouldn't be angry with God. Why not?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'm not a theologian. Theologians have been arguing these questions for thousands of years. But here's what I know. As a therapist, as a coach, as someone who works with spirituality, I can honestly tell you I'm a woman of faith. I believe, I've seen it, people do about 85% better in mental health care who are able to tap into their faith and trust God. Sure, it's okay to get angry with God. Yes. In fact, Job never got angry with God. His wife did. His wife told him to curse God and die and get it over with. Kill yourself and curse God and get it over with.
Well, didn't he say to God, though, I cursed it, I should have been not born, I should have, something like that? He was angry.
Didn't curse God. He was sorry he was born.
Right.
That's significant depression right there. Wish I was never born. Wish I wasn't here. But he never cursed God. And God rewarded him greatly for that. However, I believe that in times like this, we shouldn't be questioning our purpose and how horrible God is in a trial. Now, that doesn't mean we don't suffer and we don't get mad at God. And again, I'm not a theologian, so what I tell people is when they're able to tap into their spirituality and feel it, to heal it, and have those heart-to-heart questions with God or your rabbi or your pastor or your priest. Maybe it is time to have those conversations. But I believe that 85% of people do much better when they're able to tap into their faith and know that there's some greater good for what's going to happen, because the Bible does say that all things work together for good. And that doesn't mean some things, and it doesn't mean they might work out. It just says all things work together for good. And I do believe that.
Is that how you train with your trauma? You know, your system. I mean, because I'm sure you're dealing with people that have a lot of trauma. But how's that work?
So here's how that works. I had a client who was significantly traumatized growing up, both mentally, physically, and sexually by family members. And as an adult, a young adult, he had a job on Wall Street, and he was doing pretty good. And just one day, he just had a breakdown. And he has never recovered to the financial place where he was. But I have to tell you, he's one of my all-stars, because whenever we would meet, he wanted to talk about God and his faith, and his level of faith in God was amazing to me, that he knew that God had some greater reason for what he went through. Now, there are times we will never know the reason. the man that I'm married to now, his sister and her 19-month-old were murdered in 1995. There is absolutely there makes no sense there. What do we say? That God had a reason?
Right.
I don't know. I tend to allow everyone to process their own walk of faith.
So when you created the grid system, was it to heal yourself first?
So I created the grid system because I had already been through my journey and my health and healing. So as I said, after my first brother was killed in a car accident, I moved back to the area that I grew up in because I was unable to make decisions. I was not healthy. I had self-sabotaging behavior. I was contemplating, do I really need to be on this earth? Should I just end it? I had absolutely no resiliency skills. And I actually started to join a church. I joined a church, which is where I met Vince Augustinelli, who I'm married to today, 23 years later. And we were friends, and his sister one day took her baby shopping at a new baby clothing store. And he called me late one night in September. It was a very crisp, cool fall evening in September in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and no one knew where she was. And I watched my parents suffer the loss of two sons, family members, significant challenges, setbacks. I was watching them learn resilience. I watched my mother-in-law of Vince, who went through this horrific loss when we found where Lisa's body had been hidden and the baby's body was found.
Was that solved? They solved that murder?
It was solved immediately. It was solved immediately, yes.
Okay.
And so the person that was convicted of the crime is doing a double life sentence. So I watched her also learn resilience. And here's what I want to get at. It helped me to want to further my research and my delving more into human behavior as to why some people get through stuff and some people don't. And that's what I started to process as the grid system. And so I found that people had been learning resilience through what they were suffering, as I did. I learned resilience through I was suffering.
So you have a license in psychotherapist?
Yes.
And trauma specialist and then stress management facilitator. So
yes.
How have you combined that, with your training, psychology, with the coaching? Because not everybody's trained in that in their coaching programs.
Yes. That's the thing that I saw, that a lot of people need therapy and not coaching, and a lot of people need coaching and not therapy. So how do we distinguish between the two? With me, either virtually or on Facebook or my website, we could talk in person. I do mastermind groups. What I found is if you follow this, in 4 days, you will start to see a difference in your life. It works for me. It works for thousands of people I've been helping over the years. And just getting honest, being aware, self-awareness is key. And so give me a call. I'm very easy to get a hold of, and I'm always available to help and answer any questions anybody might have. I would love to do that.
All right. Have a fabulous day.
Thanks, guys. God bless.
But God bless.